between incumbent District 78 Representative Joe Moody to my right and his Republican opponent Jeffrey Lane. It is good to have you both here. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
We'll dive right into the questions. We'll give you about 2 minutes on these questions. We're going to try to hold you to that after the last one. Everybody went a little bit long. Mr. Lane, we'll start with you. Would you please just tell us about yourself, including your education, employment, political experience, and why you're running?
Okay. Yes, I grew up in El Paso. We moved here when I was 3. I grew up in the Northeast. I went to Irvine High School. After I graduated, I went to Baylor University, and I got a degree in computer engineering, Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering. I came back and I worked at White Sands Missile Range for 4 years, and then I went, got a job in Dallas and a couple of jobs in Dallas, and I basically spent almost 10 years in the computer industry, did almost everything you can do with computers. Came back, was taking care of my ailing father, who eventually passed away. I became more involved at church, and I was taking whatever jobs I could, and I got more and more away from computers. I got one job working for a water testing company. I also had a friend who ran a daycare, and she offered me a job as a bookkeeper, so I spent 5 years as a bookkeeper. And during that time, as I was taking care of my ailing father and then my ailing mother and my grandmother, I became aware of how important it is to get out there and be involved in your community. And so I became more involved at church and got into leadership positions, and I have a passion for the Republican Party, and so...
We wish you belong here in terms of why you ran, if I may. I mean, basically, why did you dive into this race?
Right. So I wanted to represent my community in the public eye, and this is the first one that was available.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Representative Moody, same kind of question. Tell us about your education, profession, and your record in office, and once again, why you're running for a 3rd term in the Texas House of Representatives.
Sure, absolutely. Currently serving as State Representative, District 78. So to give folks an idea of what that is, I always find that easy. As we're talking about schools, define that by high school. So Anthony, Canutillo, Franklin, Andrus, Parkland. So it's the northwest, northeast part of El Paso. There's 5 legislators that come from El Paso. One of the 5. This is the end of my 3rd term in the legislature. Born and raised here in El Paso, educated here. I went to New Mexico State for my undergraduate degree, so apologies to UTEP fans. Went to Texas Tech for my law degree, came back home and became an assistant district attorney in the office of Mr. Jaime Esparza. Served as an assistant district attorney there for a couple of years, and then ran for state office at 27 years of age. And was elected in 2008 the first time, was the youngest one serving in 2009. Very proud of the track record that I have built in the legislature, become a leader on criminal justice reform and looking at issues of our justice system, making sure it's an efficient one, that we punish those that really truly need it, that we can rehabilitate those that are available to it, that we're efficient with the funds that we use, that we're giving victims rights in our courtrooms, and making sure that that system is the best that it can be. Again, given my background, it lent itself very well to that pursuit, but also working on El Paso specific issues related to UTEP, Texas Tech, our Franklin Mountain State Visitor Center, State Park Visitor Center, and issues like that. So I think we've built a good resume of things that we've done. The reason I'm running again is because there is more work to be done. I think that we need a strong contingent of folks from El Paso that are making sure that not just UTEP and Texas Tech are looked out for, but our community college, also our public schools, which are in dire need of increased funding. And one issue that I've been working primarily on during the interim is mental health and reforming our mental health care system here in Texas.
Was I in error when I said that you're running for a 3rd term? You're running for a 4th term?
This would be my 4th term.
Your 4th term, excuse me, I'm sorry. Mr. Lane, it's a tough question, actually. You have no experience in public office. Mr. Moody does. Why should the voters fire him and hire you?
Well, I think Mr. Moody, Joe, is a good man, but I say that he's in danger of becoming a career politician. I think the job is more of a one or two and done, and I think at this point in our state of El Paso and Texas, I think we need some new perspectives, and I think I bring a lot of experience that maybe is different than Joe, and with all his legal experience, and I think maybe I can think outside the box a little better. So I think we're looking for maybe some more conservative ideas when it comes to state representative, and so.
Okay, we'll try to
That's
get
what
into some of that if we can.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Mr. Moody, in the 2015 legislative session, you had some success with the bill to decriminalize the possession of under 1 ounce of marijuana. Would you tell us about that bill, and assuming you'll introduce it again, what good it would do if it passed?
Sure, and this really dovetails with what I was talking about before in criminal justice reform. As the saying goes, we lock up people we're scared of, not people we're mad at. So the idea is we are spending an inordinate amount of money, taxpayer dollars, on locking up mostly young people for small possessions of marijuana. As a prosecutor, I know where these cases fell on my priority list. I was more focused on domestic violence, on harassment cases, on DWI, things that could do real harm in our community. Most of these cases are nonviolent cases, young offenders that aren't going to reoffend. We spend $700 million a year in Texas on prosecution, arrest, incarceration of young people for offenses like this. So the idea is not to get into the morality of drug use, but to say, look, what we're doing right now in locking people up for this specific crime is not working, and it is not an efficient use of our taxpayer dollars. Let's be smart about the way we do that. Let's not arrest people. Let's not incarcerate them. Let's cite them with a fine. If the judge feels that they need community service or they need drug counseling, the judge is given that power under my legislation. I was proud to have bipartisan support on that bill. Got it out of committee the first time it had ever been introduced. This idea had never been introduced in Texas before.
Let me interrupt you just a little bit and ask you, is there two things? One, why 1 ounce? Why not 2? Was there an amount? And secondly, is there actually a chance you think that a bill like this would pass this session?
Well, I think there's growing momentum behind changing the ways we look at drug policy. Various states are doing different things. So there's 3 arenas that you can work in. Retail market like Colorado, Washington, medical use. New Mexico has restricted medical use. Texas actually has and voted this last session for a limited medical use of marijuana. That actually exists in Texas today. And decriminalization is the other. I think we have a very strong potential to pass this legislation. We have new Republican supporters that have gone on record during the interim. And the reason 1 ounce is, so we do all of our drug crimes by weight.
Yep.
And so the lowest grade penalty of marijuana possession was Class B, and it was 2 ounces or less. So we just cut that in half, and we dropped everything into a civil fine.
And if I'm not mistaken, in some cities, most, like I think of Austin, in fact, they really don't prosecute those small amounts. They actually dismiss most of them.
I can't imagine that they would spend any time. This is really also a law enforcement issue. What time do you want to waste arresting a young person for what is left of a joint? That's 4 or 5 hours of an officer's shift. That is not a responsible use of their time. They can be doing better things. They can be, and I tell you, I worked in law enforcement, alongside law enforcement as a prosecutor. I know they want to be doing more important things than that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say one thing
I'm coming back to you on this thing, and I just want to ask you what your own thoughts about jailing people for small amounts of pots and the whole issue of sort of decriminalization that he's proposing. And, for your 2 minutes, anything else you want to say on it?
Okay, well, like I said, I worked at a daycare for 5 years, and my message to the children would be, don't do drugs. They're bad for you, they're bad for your life. I wouldn't want to be saying, don't do drugs except for maybe 1 ounce. So I think the message gets garbled when you start, dealing with certain...
But is it worth spending all that money? If we're spending $700 million on minor possession issues a year, is that really a good investment of our tax dollars? Not to mention the issues that and the impact that these kind of arrests and even minor convictions have on people's lives.
Well, look, I mean, when I went to high school at Irvin, I knew young men who were smoking marijuana, and they were friends of mine, and I would hire them in an instant today, and work with them. But I'm not, I wouldn't change laws to say, well, it's okay to go out and smoke a little marijuana. My point is that the message needs to be sent correctly, and I don't know how much of this $700 million comes from the state budget or whatever, but I do know that most of the money that the state spends goes either for health care or education. So those are the two main issues we need to tackle. I think loosening the laws on marijuana is probably not as important as other issues.
I'll just ask you real quickly, what would you say about the $700 million? Is that out of state funds?
The bulk majority of those funds are local taxpayer dollars, but impacted by a state law. So the mandate to arrest and incarcerate and charge these people and run them through the prosecutorial
So it's county and city
system.
funds?
Yeah, so you're talking about, so if our community, and we talk about it you talk about go down to county commissioner's court, what's one of the biggest things they talk about? The jail.
The jail.
Right? Cost of jailing. And I've got data from El Paso County that shows how many people were jailed solely on these types of offenses. And I'll tell you who gets convicted of these crimes. It's poor people. Because they can't afford an attorney. They maybe make a little too much to qualify for one to be appointed for them. And they need to get out of jail. And so what do? They plead guilty. Not knowing the ramifications outside of the criminal justice system. Harder to get a job. Harder to rent an apartment. If you're in school and you're getting student financial aid, you're disqualified. These are the types of reasons why the Texas Association of Business, not a liberal organization, supported my legislation, because they saw that for the economy as a whole and for employability of young people, this is not a smart way to do things. As a father of two young children, I really do appreciate Mr. Lane's comment about messages to children. It's something that I've thought very deeply about in looking at legislation like this. What message are we sending? I'd like to think that everything the legislature does is thought over very well with kids. But if you look in Colorado, a state that is liberalized marijuana laws much further than I'm proposing here, they have seen no increase in youth usage. In fact, a slight decrease in youth usage of marijuana since they legalized it. So the two don't really equate.
I don't want to jump in on this, but have they not also seen a significant drop in incarceration costs and expenditures for criminal justice?
Yes, and also actually a decrease in alcohol consumption.
Okay.
So,
another hot button issue, I'm going to come back to you on
Sure.
this one because we sort of went out of order a little bit. Another hot button issue is in the state is abortion. The Supreme Court in June, the U.S. Supreme Court in June, struck down a Texas law that was forcing clinics that performed abortions to close. Justice Brewer wrote that there were, quote, no significant health-related problems that the new law helped to cure, and that was some of his words on his decision to strike this law down. What do you think of that ruling, and what other steps do you think the legislature could take to reduce abortions in Texas?
well, and you're referring to House Bill 2. I think everybody remembers the debate over that legislation and Wendy Davis's filibuster. This is a bill that we offered amendment after amendment after amendment to improve it, to letting the authors of this bill know that what they were doing was ultimately going to be unconstitutional, because what they were doing was creating a de facto ban on a constitutional right. We told them that. We offered a Republican member offered an amendment that said, let's create a ban, but with an exception for the health of the mother, for rape and for incest. Rejected. We offered an outright ban with no exceptions. Rejected. So there was an effort to make this bill constitutional. It was rejected. Why? Because what the authors of the bill wanted was something to go to the Supreme Court and be tested at that level. So if you want to have a constructive discussion about abortion, about women's health rights, then we should have one. This conversation, I was a part of it during this legislation. I voted against this bill, and I would vote against it if it was not done in a way that was protective of that constitutional right. And there was not a real conversation. And that's unfortunate because these are serious issues.
The second half of the question was, we just have a little bit of time on this one right now, just 30 seconds if you can, is there anything additional actually that the state should be doing, not along these lines necessarily, to reduce abortion?
Sure. Why don't we do, I think we can expand educational efforts. We can expand access to family planning so that people have that ability to work with their doctor, to work with their family, to understand a little bit better and have more access. Part of this is about access to health care for women. And so when you restrict all those things on the front end and then you create a de facto ban on the back end, that's what creates an unconstitutional system.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Lane, same kind of question for you. What do you think of that ruling, and what do you think the legislature should do now?
I don't know. I haven't studied up on that. All I can say is I'm a pro-life guy. You know, I'm for Chihuahuas baseball, hot dogs, and apple pie, and
But not abortion.
not abortion, and going to church every Sunday, and you know, our message needs to be more pro-family and things of that nature. And we get away from those when we start talking about you know, problems that are difficult to talk about over, you know, family supper, you know.
Okay, coming back to you, Mr. Moody. Is there anything that the legislature should do in 2017, in the 2017 session, that you think would advance the economic development in El Paso and in District 78 in particular?
Absolutely. Education is the key to all economic development. So the way that we're investing in public education is something that we need to continually look at. The way we invest in higher education, and make sure that our institutes of higher learning are fully funded. The way that we're going, you know, that we've seen private investment here in El Paso to a great degree in terms of, you saw the dental school funding, and you have great private investment. We need to make sure that the public sector plays a role in making sure that we can continue to expand those efforts, because the healthcare industry is one that can greatly improve the economy here in El Paso. And the other one is to stop the rhetoric about the border and the false statements being put out about our community. Border trade is vital to our economy, not just here in El Paso, but to Texas. 1/3 of our gross state product is directly attributable to trade with Mexico. 50% of all trade that comes in the United States from Mexico comes through Texas ports. But we don't hear about that. What we hear about is unaccompanied minors, and you hear scare stories about bombs going off in El Paso. You have people saying that there's you know, Taliban members along the border. I mean, these types of things need to be thrown to the side because they're not realistic. There are security issues along the border. No one's denying that. But we're not at the same time talking about the economic ties that we have to Mexico and the way we have to respect that. And safe legal trade going forward is something we have to continue to promote, not inhibit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lane. Is there anything that you think that the Texas legislature could do, should do, that would help El Paso economically?
Well, I agree with Joe that you know, our trade with Mexico is very important for El Paso and the state. But I do think that border security is important, and you know, like I said again, the two main issues for state spending are on health care and education. So we need to tackle those so that they can free up whatever we need for border security.
Well, let me ask you, what do you mean by that in terms of, freeing up money that is being spent on health care and education so that we can spend it on border security? Is that what you mean?
Well, like I said, the two main issues that we're spending money on, as our lieutenant governor came a little while ago, and he said, if you look at our budget like a clock, from 12 to 6 is spent on education, and from 6 to 12 is being spent on healthcare issues. Now, if the budget is being eaten up by those, it's very difficult to budget for other issues, including border security and roads and all those types of things. So-
Okay, let me go to you, Mr. Moody. Do you think that border security is a problem in Texas? You touched on it a minute ago. And are you in favor of the proposal, the existing proposal now, to further increase the number of Texas DPS troopers guarding the border?
Look, we discussed this in the committee I serve on, Homeland Security and Public Safety. We discussed it at length. We discussed it on the floor of the Texas House. Until someone can give me a definition of what a secure border is, then it's hard for us to set metrics, and that's a big part of the problem. So if there's a budget that's requested, $800 million in the last session, they're now requesting $1 billion in the next session.
This is money they have.
This is money that they have $800 million in this last budget, and they're requesting $200 million more
Okay.
in the next budget. So to what end? To what end? What are we getting for those funds? I know that we've hired more troopers, but the idea that we should have some sort of state border patrol really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. DPS and troopers within DPS, I think, can serve a vital role in going after transnational gangs and activities that they're conducting with criminal street gangs in Texas. That's smart. That's a good use of their resources to pair up with the feds, to pair up with local prosecutors, to share resources. But when you talk about just increasing, surging levels of troopers on the border, all we saw a great increase in traffic citations in the Rio Grande Valley. Is that really what we get out of this increased funding? I want to know what success looks like and what the metrics to get there are. Because we talk about accountability all the time. This is a very conservative state, and we hear those buzzwords all the time. Accountability and knowing what we're spending our taxpayer dollars on, except when it comes to border security.
And are you saying that, in fact, that they have not come up with those metrics, or, in fact, the actual results of having these officers?
Some of the data that's been presented to us, they're taking credit for other agencies' activities. That's not the way that we need to conduct business. I think DPS plays a vital role in security in Texas. But when we're talking about a price tag of $1 billion, we need to know what we're getting. And part of the legislation that passed last session was some accountability. We want to know, and we want reports back to the legislature about what we're getting for those dollars.
Well, and I can bring the question to you. It sounds like there is money for this kind of thing. What are your thoughts on border security and using DPS troopers to guard the border?
Well, I am in favor of it. Look, when I was growing up, there was a foreign exchange student program where we had kids coming over from Europe or wherever and staying in families' homes, and they were taken care of, and they were fed, and they were brought into the society and integrated well. And I'm hearing that we're going to have 60,000 unaccompanied minors coming up across the southern border. Now, the kind of strains that's going to put on our system, they're not being integrated, who's taking care of them, where are they going? I think all of that down the line, you can save some by beefing up the border security.
Okay.
So,
Let's see, we only have a few minutes, about 4 minutes left here. Mr. Lane, this question is also for you. And I know that this was something that you had raised before. So what do you think about teacher salaries in Texas? Are they too high? Are they too low? And about the general state of secondary education in the state, kind of financing aside, because we'll get to that next.
Right, well, so as I said before, that almost half of the budget of Texas being spent on education, and almost half is being spent on healthcare. So we need to be looking for ways to make those more efficient, and as Joe said, accountability. But so whether it's charter schools or whether it's education savings accounts, that we can look at reducing those costs. Now, teachers do a very important job in wherever they are, and I just, I'm not, a part of a school board or what have you, but if a teacher's starting salary is higher than the average salary that the community has, I question whether that's fair.
And I'm going to have to cut you right off there because we actually are a little bit shorter on time than we thought. Mr. Moody, can you quickly basically just give us your thoughts on sort of teacher salaries and in the state and the general state of education?
We don't do well by the students in the classroom, by the teachers in the classroom, or for our parents at home. We are failing our public schools. Since 2011, when we had massive budget cuts across the board, we have never recovered from that. We have a Texas Supreme Court case right now that says we are underfunding English language learners and underfunding our lower income students. While they found our system constitutionally valid at a minimal level, we still have an obligation to make sure these kids, we have a constitutional obligation in Texas to take care of our public school system. We're not there yet, and we have a long way to go.
Okay. I think we might have a little time for closing statements here. 30 seconds to you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having us.
Actually, a little less than that, as a matter of fact.
You got it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's been my honor to serve in this position and to be granted that opportunity by the people of El Paso. I'm asking for their consideration again, and based on the work that I've done and the work that's left to do.
And Mr. Lane, very quickly.
Great. Thank you again. I love PBS. Bring back Downton Abbey and Inspector Lewis.
No kidding.
Thank you for the opportunity to get my message out. Please vote for me, and I hope to see you in November.
Thank you both. I think we're just about out of time. This concludes our forum for the State Representative District 78 candidates. Our thanks to Joe Moody and to Jeffrey Lane for coming. KCOS and League of Women Voters remind you that early voting is from Monday, October 24th through Friday, November 4th. Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. For complete information about all races and all candidates, go to vote411.org. Your vote is your voice. Be heard. Go vote. Thank you all. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you.
you all.
Thank you.